Sit, Coco, sit. Good dog. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Retail Archaeology. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at Staples. Staples was founded 39 years ago in 1986 in Brighton, Massachusetts by Thomas Stemberg, Leo Kahn, and Myra Hart. The idea of creating a national chain of large office supply stores came to Thomas Stenberg back in 1985 when he was working on a project for a different business, and he needed a printer ribbon, and he couldn't find any local dealers that were open because it was the 4th of July holiday. Since the first Staples store opened in 1986 in Brighton, Massachusetts, they've now grown to 860 stores in the United States with 40 warehouse and fulfillment centers. They do have a presence in Canada as well, but I had a hard time figuring out exactly how many stores they have in Canada. Staples started with backing from a few private equity firms, including Bain Capital, and the co-founder of Bain Capital, Mitt Romney, actually served on the company's board of directors for 15 years. Over the years, Staples has acquired several other smaller office supply related businesses, but I think my favorite attempted acquisition by them is Office Depot. Staples has tried to acquire Office Depot a few times. The first time happened in 1996, and during that attempted acquisition, the Federal Trade Commission actually stepped in and said, no, you're not doing that. That's going to create a monopoly when it comes to office supply stores. They then tried to acquire Office Depot again in 2015. And again, the Federal Trade Commission said, no, you can't do that. A few years after that second failed acquisition of Office Depot, Staples was purchased by Sycamore Partners in 2017 for $6.9 billion. 1.6 of that was funded as equity, but the remaining a little over $5 billion was raised as debt. Also during that purchase, Sycamore Partners took the Staples company and split it into 3 independently managed and capitalized entities, and those would be the Staples business-to-business business, the Staples retail locations in the US, and the Staples retail locations in Canada. And all 3 of those entities share the name Staples. The leveraged buyout back in 2017 is actually one of the reasons why I decided to do a video covering Staples, because this is another example of a large national retailer being shouldered with a large amount of debt from a leveraged buyout. Another reason is just because I kind of enjoy office supply stores. They are always kind of weird to walk around, and this one is very, very empty. When I came into this Staples location a few weeks ago, it was the first time that I had been in an office supply store for several years, and the first thing that caught my eye, well, not so much my eye, but my nose, was the unique smell that only office supply stores seem to have. It's a scent of paper and ink, maybe a touch of ozone from the laser printers and copiers over in the business center. It's a smell that's definitely unique to office supply stores, and they all have this smell. If I walked you into an office supply store blindfolded and didn't tell you what kind of store it was that we walked into, and I asked you what it was, just from the smell, you would probably be able to tell that it was an office supply store. Getting back on the subject of the Sycamore acquisition of Staples, remember that I mentioned the acquisition was for $6.9 billion and only $1.6 billion of that was funded as actual equity? Well, just a few years later in 2019, Sycamore Partners was able to recoup most of that $1.6 billion investment. They accomplished this through something called a dividend recapitalization, which I don't entirely understand what that is because I'm not a financial advisor, but it allowed them to refinance $5.4 billion of that debt against its ownership of Staples, and that produced a $1 billion one-time dividend for the private equity firm. This surprised a lot of financial analysts because in the end it allowed Sycamore to recover roughly 80% of its equity investment into Staples in less than 2 years. It also increased the debt that Staples is carrying to just under $7 billion total. That was 6 years ago, so at this point, Sycamore Partners is probably now turning a profit on their investment in Staples. But again, Staples also has over $6 billion in debt hanging around their neck at this point. 2 years later, in 2021, even with all of that debt, Staples tried for a third time to purchase Office Depot. That offer was just rejected though, even before the FTC had to step in again. Now, just about a year ago, in June of 2024, Staples was able to refinance all of that debt that they had, which was important because they had a $300 million loan payment that was coming up very soon, and then another $5 billion due in 2026. That refinancing last year has basically kicked the can down the road to 2029, where $2.375 billion will be due. And that brings us to today, where we're in a Staples store looking at a really dirty display model for a mechanical keyboard. They really should clean that. That's ugh. I used the term kick the can down the road for the refinancing because that really does feel like what it is. Revenues at Staples stores have been declining over the years. And why is there a Nintendo sign here over the print cartridges? Did they ever sell Nintendo stuff at Staples? Because this is all just toner cartridges. That's weird. Here's a look at the software section, and this used to be a big section at office supply stores like Staples, and now it's just this one little set of shelves, and it's really just keys that you can purchase to download these programs. And it's just Microsoft Office and antivirus stuff. And that's the problem with the office supply industry in general. Offices just use a lot less supplies. A lot of offices have switched to becoming paperless, which means, they would have filing cabinets with filing folders and dividers all full of paper, and now a lot of those things that they would buy at an office supply store are all just on one $15 thumb drive. This was filmed on the weekend, and this store was pretty much devoid of shoppers while I was here. And it's not just a problem with Staples. I've been in an Office Max recently, and it was kind of the same story. There was really nobody else in there. From what I understand, Staples' business-to-business sales business is doing better than their retail locations, and I think that kind of makes sense. I think a lot of people now, because they're not buying so many office supplies so frequently, it's easier just to order some stuff and have an order come once a month with the few things that you need. I do like that you can buy Christmas cookies, though, in Staples in the middle of the summer. Those butter cookies I usually only see during Christmas time in stores. As far as customers who don't own businesses and may just come to Staples to maybe purchase a specific color of printer paper for a school project or something, I feel like a lot less of that's occurring here as well, because stores like Target and Walmart have really expanded their selection of that kind of stuff, and it's just easier to grab the couple of things that you need for a school project while you're at Walmart grabbing other stuff that you would normally buy. They do have a lot of back to school and supplies for teachers here specifically as well. Although I do know some teachers, and I never hear them mentioning shopping for things at, Staples or Office Max and Office Depot. Unfortunately, teachers have to dip into their own pockets for a lot of that kind of stuff, so I think they try and find the cheapest deal they can find for that kind of stuff at places like Amazon. Now, I did purchase something while I was here. I really like these 4-color pens, and these ones were kind of interesting because instead of just the normal blue color on the bottom, they had like a gold, silver, and bronze color, so I bought that. I also saw the famous Staples Easy Button. I had forgotten about this, but they had some on display here, but unfortunately they didn't work. Overall, I would say that things are looking kinda dicey for Staples. Now, we are gonna head out of this location, but the video is not over yet. This footage is from just a few weeks ago, but I do have some footage from 5 years ago from when I started working on a Staples video and wasn't able to finish it, so let's take a trip back in time to 5 years ago. So here's footage that I filmed of a Staples store 5 years ago when I was originally working on a video, because I had found out that Staples was carrying a large amount of debt, and at the time a lot of it was going to be coming up due soon. However, since then they were able to pull off that refinancing that I talked about earlier and kind of push things off to 2029. But I thought this 5-year-old footage would still be useful in this video because we can kind of get an idea of what Staples looked like 5 years ago, how the stores were doing, and also this was pre-COVID, so before any of the pandemic effects happened. And from what I can see here and what I remember when filming this is the store was very, very dead, just like it was in the earlier footage. And I don't know that Staples is really going to be doing any better when 2029 comes around and a lot of those liabilities are due. Unless something dramatic happens to increase footfall in their retail locations and sales go way up, I think 2029 might be the end of Staples. If they're not able to pay that over $2 billion that is due then, I don't see that there's going to be any way for them to do another refinancing and then kick things to later on down the road. Here's something you wouldn't see in a Staples store today, one of these little online ordering kiosks. Those aren't really necessary anymore. And just like how those online kiosks went away, I could see Staples stores going away eventually. Now, because Staples was split into those three entities, where one of them is the B2B side of the business, that side of the business seems to be doing better than the retail store business. So even if all of the Staples stores close, I don't think that'll mean the end of the Staples name. There just won't be stores called Staples anymore. It'll strictly be office supply delivery and business-to-business sales. It's kind of interesting to see this little pad for trying out the pens, because that's something that disappeared during COVID. Now, according to my notes, this footage is from March of 2020, and it's interesting to see that even back then, 5 years ago, they had those tins of butter cookies here all year round. So if you're ever having a craving for those cookies and it's not during the holiday season, you could always come to Staples to buy them. We can also kind of see some inflation, because in 2020 those cookies are $4.99, but in the earlier footage that was from a few weeks ago, they were $6.29. It's also interesting to see in this older footage that there's still some color in the store, like the signs hanging from the ceiling for the different sections have that green stripe, but if you go back and look at the newer footage, the store is very monotone. They've pulled the last remaining bit of color out and everything's just neutral colors. And I have to say, I prefer the way the store looks in 2020 much better. Now here's something I didn't see in the store when I was there a few weeks ago, but was here in 2020, is they had a whole section of Martha Stewart branded office supplies. That stapler is awesome. May not be a red swing line, but I do like the gold. They even had Martha Stewart Sharpies. Now that there's so many office workers that telecommute now and don't go into the office, I'm sure there's less of a demand for decorative office supplies. It always gets me too. Look at the price of some of these ink cartridges, and this was 5 years ago, and some of those sets are over $100. And even back then, they had the cameras and monitors making sure that you weren't stealing ink cartridges. And Shaq was in Staples stores all the way back in 2020. And I think that's a life-size cardboard cutout. So I had Mark go stand next to it because Mark's about 6'3". So yeah, that's probably life-size. Based on this old footage and the newer footage though, I think the office supply store business might be cooked, but let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. I think if things don't turn around dramatically by 2029 when all of that money is due, Staples could end up filing for bankruptcy. But I think we'll wrap things up here with the podcast equipment from 2020 when everybody was starting podcasts. As always everyone, thanks for watching. Want to see your name here? Head on over to patreon.com/Retail Archaeology to find out how you can help support the channel. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out my video covering Staples. If you liked it, please make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons, and also follow at the social media links down there because that's the best way to keep up with what's going on with the Retail Archaeology channel.